It wasn't so long ago, was it, that funerals were left to the grieving. Even some of our most controversial figures, and I'm thinking here of the figures in Melbourne's gangland wars, were left alone for their families to farewell in peace. Yet modern Australia, as we saw today in Sydney, even with a High Court verdict unanimously declaring his innocence, protesters sought to literally hound Cardinal George Pell to his grave. How many of them knew he was the first senior clergyman in the world to put in place a process for victims of child sex abuse in the church to be heard? First in the world. Or that he involved the police rather than try and cover up the crimes as some did before him. Former Prime Minister Tony Abbott addressed this very point in his eulogy today.
Here in Australia, he was the first Archbishop to sack misbehaving clergy and report them to the police rather than hide them in another parish. To the smug, to the venal, to the lazy, to the wayward, and to the intellectually sloppy, he was an existential reproach. And because that's all of us, in some way, it's hardly surprising that he became a target.
Indeed, when George Pell was promoted by the Pope to one of the highest positions in Rome to basically act as a financial controller for the church there and throughout the world, he went deeper and more forensically into those financial records than anyone before him. Now, what he uncovered, and it's all now before the courts, his brother said was his undoing.
By the time George and his team found €1.2 billion that was not properly accounted for, his fate was sealed.
With time and through the courts, this will all play out. That he was, as Abbott said, a hammer for reform in the Catholic Church.
And far from being an apologist or a dissembler about the sins of the Church, personal, financial or intellectual, he was their hammer. As he knew, Ecclesia Semper Reformanda, the Church is always in need of reform.
But it was the remarks from George Pell's brother today which struck me the most deeply, because as a family that loved and supported their brother and uncle, they too suffered when he was attacked publicly, falsely accused and then jailed for 404 days. To have endured solitary confinement for a crime he didn't commit, I can't imagine how hard that must have been. But to have prayed for your accusers and forgiven them, well, he's a better person than me. Even in prison, his personality extended beyond his cell to other prisoners.
His acquittal by the High Court was greeted with wild cheering in his section at Bar and Prison as the announcement was made on TV, 7-0. He knew that he was free.
I still find it incredible that in a cell by himself, solitary confinement, he was banned from saying Mass for himself. Does the Victorian prison system ban Muslim prisoners from rolling out their prayer mats and bowing to Mecca? I bet they don't. But Victoria, under Premier Andrews, is a place where abuse against Catholics is tolerated, some might even say encouraged. Despite, of course, Andrews growing up attending Catholic schools. Perhaps he was front of mind with this comment from brother David Pell.
The so-called Catholic and inverted commas, commentators, experts and public figures that probably being educated by the Catholic Church is the only thing they have in common with the Church.
As Tony Abbott said with his characteristic clarity,
he was made a scapegoat for the Church itself. He should never have been investigated in the absence of a complaint. He should never have been charged in the absence of corroborating evidence, and he should never have been convicted in the absence of a plausible case, as the High Court so resoundingly made plain. But had he died in jail, without the High Court's vindication, this today would have been a very different event, even though his innocence would have been no less had it been known only to God.
Outside the church, amongst the protesters, I saw footage of their signs railing against same-sex marriage and abortion, and what struck me was their ignorance. These are traditional church teachings that they oppose. Well, fair enough. Don't follow the Catholic faith, as I suspect many of them don't. But don't accuse Cardinal Pell from following his faith on these matters, because what he taught was the Church's doctrine, not something he just invented himself. It was, as you would expect, a very traditional Requiem Mass for the most senior Catholic this nation has ever produced. The humble son of a Ballarat publican who almost ended up as a VFL footballer rather than a man of God. I will leave the last word to the brother who issued a call for all of us, Catholic or not, but as Australians who believe in the rule of law and what it should represent or did represent in this country of ours.
We implore you to rid yourselves of the woke algorithm of mistruths, half-truths and outright lies that are being perpetrated.
Rest in peace, George Pell.